They brought the lawyer into my living room like he was a delivery. I sat at the end of the sofa with my hands folded and watched my daughter sign a paper that she said would settle everything. I had worked with my hands for 40 years, paid taxes, fixed roofs and cars, and still I felt like a ghost watching my life be folded into an envelope. When the lawyer pushed the copy across the coffee table, he said, "There are a few changes to the will." I read the names and felt my chest hollow out. They had written me out. I grew up believing work was character. I raised a family on overtime shifts and second jobs, and I taught my children that a man keeps his word. My pride was modest: a tidy house, a lawn that didn't embarrass anyone, and a savings account meant to keep me comfortable the last years. I had a marriage that worked until it didn't, a business that limped along after divorce, and a reputation among neighbors for being dependable. The morning they delivered that paper, I still believed my children loved me for who I was, not for my bank balance. I had been careful with money because the one thing I wanted was to die with dignity. I paid for the funerals of my folks, and I promised myself I would leave something for my children, not to buy their loyalty, but to give them a start or a safety net. The savings were modest by other people's standards, but to me, they were the last proof that my life meant something. Still, nothing prepares you for the way silence feels when the people you raised treat you like a liability. The silence was a verdict in itself. They started with small things: a missed birthday here, a skipped Thanksgiving the year the tires went flat. The calls that once came like clockwork turned to text messages that took days to answer. I told myself busy lives explained everything. I told myself I was fine. Then the calls stopped. My daughter began to answer only when it benefited her, and my son spoke through my ex-wife if he even spoke at all. It is the little betrayals that are the worst because they teach you to ignore the first warning signs. One afternoon, I received a notarized power of attorney in the mail. My son had signed it, or so it said. I called him and he laughed like he was surprised to hear me. "Oh, Dad, I signed something because Mom said you needed help with the bills. Don't worry about it." But when I asked to see the paperwork, he said he had misplaced it. When I pressed, he changed the subject. My chest tightened the way it does before a storm. I had always known family could fail you, but I had not expected them to use my trust as a ladder to climb over me. Chapter 3: Rising Conflict. Money, Lies, and Legal Paperwork. Then the bills started piling up. Not mine, but for things I had never authorized. A credit card I didn't open. A contractor I never hired. They had dotted my life with strange expenses like a thief leaves candy wrappers. My neighbor, who had known me 30 years, called one morning and said he had seen movers in my house taking boxes labeled kitchen. I drove home and found 2 framed paintings gone and the freezer empty. The locks had been changed. I went to the bank. The teller looked at me like I was a man trying to cash a check from a dead country. "Sir, there are withdrawals and a loan we have on your house." The words were clinical, but the weight they carried was not. I asked for paperwork and was given copies with signatures I did not recognize. Someone had used my documents to secure their own future. They had taken the account I believed would fund the last years of my life and turned it into a line on their balance sheet. I talk carefully about allies because you do not get through this alone. My old friend Maria from the hardware store sat with me and helped me read through pages of bank statements. She had known my handwriting since high school, and when I pointed out signatures, she squinted and said, "That's not you." The neighborhood pastor offered to look over affidavits, and the local clerk at the county office gave me photocopies of every recorded document on my property. Small people with small kindnesses matter. They were the ones who refused to look the other way. My daughter called and said it would be awkward if I came around while she and her husband were hosting an anniversary. My son avoided my texts, yet Maria came by with coffee and a stack of envelopes I had never seen. One contained a notice from a credit agency. Another was a contractor's lien. Each page told a story I hadn't been aware of, a ledger of people who had been paid and then never did the work they claimed. The picture started to form. It was not just negligence, it was calculated. There are always subplots in these stories because lives are messy. My ex-wife, with whom I had a brittle peace, suddenly had solutions for my management issues. She suggested selling the house to cover debts she said I had been ignoring for years. When I reminded her she had walked out a decade ago, she said, "I never walked out of your responsibilities." It was a sentence crafted to confuse guilt with truth. She had her own mortgage slips and a way of looking at me like I was the one who owed her everything. Then there was Paul, a man I had mentored in my small contracting business. He showed up in new boots and a sharper suit and called me Mister at first and then Jim, like we were boys again. He said he wanted to help with the estate because he cared. I let him in because he had been useful, and because old men want to believe the people they trained carry their values. That trust would cost me. Paul was friendly at the bar and ruthless at the closing table. He had learned how to smile and sign. Halfway through the fight, something different happened. A letter arrived from a woman I had not seen in 30 years. Her name was Elena, and she had been an old friend of my late wife's mother. She wrote in a hand that trembled but did not forget. She said she had kept something safe for me, just in case the family forgot what honor looked like. Inside the envelope was a copy of a will, not the one the lawyer had handed me, and a note that said, "If they make a move, show this." I remember the exact way the paper smelled, like mothballs and old cedar. The will named me as beneficiary of a trust account that had been set aside by my late wife's father. It had been created for the purpose of helping me in my retirement and explicitly barred my ex-wife and her heirs from touching it if they tried to seize my assets. Elena had been its guardian. She had held it because she believed I had been wronged. For the first time since the coffee table meeting, I felt something other than anger. I felt a strategy. The turn in the story was not loud. I did not storm into a courtroom with a posse. I sat down with the papers and the people who had not sold me out. Maria made tea and the pastor read the clauses. Paul stopped returning my calls. The plan was honest and slow and required paperwork and patience, which are weapons the betrayed sometimes forget they have. I hired a lawyer who would not be dazzled by my children's smiles. I paid him with the remainder of my savings and my pride. There are bills you pay to get your life back. This was one of them. The plan had small parts. First, we had to freeze any assets that were being moved. Second, we had to challenge the forged signatures. Third, we had to put a protective order on the trust Elena had revealed. It sounded simple enough on paper, and paperwork is a strange outlet for revenge because it asks you to be patient and meticulous. I learned to take comfort in details, dates, notarizations, witness lists. They became my allies. Courtrooms are not dramatic like in the movies. They are bureaucratic and cold. You stand in lines, file forms, and wait for a judge who sees 1,000 human tragedies a year. The first hearing was brief, a clerk, a stamp, a date for the real fight. My children showed up with their own lawyers and eyes like polished coins. They were younger in the courtroom than when they were children. The judge asked for documents, and we produced Elena's copy of the trust. He frowned at the alteration attempts and ordered temporary relief. The relief felt like a bandage. It did not make the theft untrue, it only slowed it. My daughter cried in front of her attorney and then stopped. She had the actor's instinct to show sorrow and then err into anger to keep people off balance. My son refused to meet my gaze. At recess, A young associate from their side stepped outside and said to me, almost kindly, "You know, Mr. Hargrove, sometimes families just split. It's messy." I wanted to answer with every hurt I had, but I kept my voice like a measured clock. "Messy," I said, "isn't the word I would use." Between hearings, there were micro payoffs that tasted like small victories. A lien removed here, a bank freeze there. Each tiny win built something larger, momentum. The bank returned a check that had been withdrawn fraudulently. Paul stopped pretending. Another contractor came forward and admitted he had been paid twice for the same job by my daughter's husband. Little admissions became damning when strung together. People are not evil in a vacuum. They are often opportunistic, and opportunism leaves a trail. I learned things about my children I wished I hadn't. My daughter had been convinced by her husband that speed mattered more than law. He said the estate would work itself out, and that I was old-fashioned. My son had debts he hid from me and owed his brother-in-law money. The motives were not noble. They were wearied calculations about what their lives needed. It hurt not because they were selfish, though they were, but because their selfishness was so ordinary. Ordinary betrayals leave the deepest scars because they are plausible. I had a reputation in that town for stubbornness. It is the sort of thing that works in your favor once. Business owners remembered that I paid my bills and honored my word. When one of those owners came to testify that certain signatures were not mine, the court listened. The husband of the woman who had been a contractor for my house admitted he had seen the check being cashed at a shop he owned. These small confirmations stacked like bricks. I was no longer a man pleading for sympathy. I was a man proving fraud. My attorney taught me that dignity in the courtroom is a kind of evidence. If you appear rattled, the opposition will feed on it. If you show calm and produce documents, they have to answer. I kept my eyes level and spoke clearly. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I said, "Only that the people in this room are my children. I would rather have them beside me than across from me." The judge did not answer. But the room shifted, like a boat settling when weight changes. We tried mediation before a trial because my lawyer believed an honest conversation could salvage more than money. The table was long, and my daughter arrived with an expression that made her look younger and colder. My son looked like someone who had stayed up all night worrying about numbers. The mediator asked us to speak, and I spoke first about how I had come to be in that chair. I told them about the roofs I had fixed and the nights I worked extra to buy school books. The stories were small, but when old men tell small truths, they cut clear. My daughter responded with a rehearsed version of events and then, halfway through, slashed open the truth with a confession. "We were scared he was losing everything," she said. "We thought if we moved things quickly, we could keep it in the family." It was an argument dressed as love. I asked her whose family she meant, and she said, "Mine." She had married up and had a new set of people who mattered more. The room smelled of coffee and fatigue and disappointment. When you move against someone's plan, expect them to lash out. A man showed up at my porch one rainy night with an envelope and a warning. "You back off and nobody gets ugly," he said. I did not call the police first because I needed to understand who would put himself on my door and why. The envelope contained photographs and a scribbled note implying things about my past that were half true and half invention. Someone had been digging. I had been naive to think that legal papers alone would scare people away. We filed the threats with the court. The judge took them seriously and issued a temporary protective order and a subpoena for the photographs. When the man who delivered the envelope took the stand, he stuttered through a story that made him look small. His testimony unraveled in public like thread. It turned out he had been paid by an associate of my daughter's husband. People will pay others to dirty work when they want to preserve plausible deniability. When the truth came to light, It did not feel like vindication so much as clearing the fog. The real turning point came when a ledger appeared from an unexpected place, an old bookkeeping ledger kept by my ex-wife's sister. She had taken scrap paper with receipts and kept it in a drawer for 30 years. In that drawer was proof of payments made from my accounts to companies that didn't exist and names that matched Paul's invoices. The ledger showed a pattern that aligned with bank records and contractor receipts. It was the sort of concrete paper trail a judge can understand. When we presented it, the opposition changed. Their faces moved in ways I had seen before, the way a gambler looks when he realizes the odds have shifted. The ledger linked my daughter's husband and Paul to a scheme of false billing. It also showed a signature that, to my eye and Maria's, did not match mine. The judge paused and ordered the handwriting expert the defense had mocked to come forward. The momentum built into something larger than resentment. It became proof. Once the ledger was in the record, my lawyer moved to recover assets and to void transactions made under the forged documents. We asked for sanctions and demanded restitution. The judge took the allegations seriously and appointed a guardian ad litem to investigate the conduct of those named. My children watched from the gallery like spectators who had become players. They shifted in their seats as if they had realized the script had been rewritten without their consent. My role had changed from supplicant to plaintiff. The legal motion to freeze accounts worked. My daughter's house had liens placed against it. My son found his credit line suspended. They called late at night and left messages that sounded smaller than their daytime voices. "Dad, can we talk?" my daughter said in one. There was plea in it now, not demand. I listened without answering and let the machine of the court run where emotion could not silence it. Justice, in its slow way, was patient and thorough. People told the truth under oath in ways they'd refused to when it was only family. A contractor admitted on record that he was paid twice, and that one of the checks had been cashed by someone I had never expected. Under cross-examination, he named names and dates. Paul, who had once been my apprentice, sat on the stand and explained his role. He stammered through an apology that sounded like a script. My daughter's husband invoked lawyer-client privilege for a moment, and then admitted to advising the bookkeeping scheme, because he believed it would protect the family. Admissions are not always complete. They come with angles and excuses. But when several people tell a consistent story under oath, the pattern is hard to deny. My lawyer asked for punitive damages and removal of the forged power of attorney. The judge nodded and said he would consider. The weight of testimony plus documents created pressure. The pressure broke small things first. A bank apologized, an accountant resigned, a contractor sent a check. Those small reversals added up. Winning in court does not repair the raw things you lose. The house had been damaged during the months of dispute. The freezer had been emptied and some treasures sold. I found a box of photographs that had been tossed. Some were ruined by water and neglect. The legal victory clawed back money but did not stitch the memory of what had been taken. My daughter would not come to my birthday that year. My son spoke to me on the phone in clipped sentences. The cost of exposure is that people you love may be ashamed or angry at being known. There were also consequences for them. They had to face a public record of what they'd done. Employment opportunities my son had hoped for were clouded. My daughter's social circle watched and judged. They had to answer questions at Thanksgiving that had been whispered around for months. Public shame is an odd currency. It forces people to reconcile with who they are when neighbors read the docket and gossip. Some things heal in public and some things only in private, but the record remains. After the court ruling, there were attempts at meeting. My daughter wrote a letter that was long and careful and asked for my forgiveness while listing conditions for any reconciliation. She wanted me to accept that she had made hard choices and I had to let them stand. My son offered to manage the trust if I would forgive them publicly. These offers felt like bargaining at a flea market. They offered what reassured them while asking me to give up my demands for accountability. I considered them like any businessman considers an offer by its bottom line. I met with them once in a coffee shop because I wanted to see if anything could be rebuilt. They were younger, yes, but also more brittle. My daughter spoke of pressure from her husband and the fear that she would lose a life she loved. My son said he had been ashamed to face me. I listened. I did not grant absolution. I told them the truth. Respect is earned in steady ways, and trust has to be repaired with time and action. They left with promises that sounded like vows. I have learned that promises are cheap. After everything, I set about repairing the damage that could be fixed. I replaced the locks myself and fixed the gutters I had once paid a man to fix. I planted a small bed of roses in the front yard because the act of tending is a way of proving you still have hands. Maria stopped by and brought lemon bars and a list of contractors who would work cheap. The repairs cost money but also returned a rhythm. I learned to find comfort in machinery and in neighborly visits. Small joys are the mortar that binds a life once a breach has been made. I kept the trust Alina had revealed under tight oversight and hired an independent trustee chosen by the court. It was not revenge exactly, it was prudence. I wrote letters I did not mail and read them aloud to the empty house, so the words would not go wasted. Sometimes I called friends, and we would sit and talk about the old days. The wind through the kitchen window reminded me that ordinary life continues if you do not let bitterness be the sole inhabitant of your mind. I lost more than money in that fight. I lost a simple faith in my children's infallibility. I lost an image of my later years that had been quiet and easy. But I kept things that mattered: my name, some dignity, the memory of honest work, and the company of people who did not sell me out. The case taught me that love is not proof against greed. It also taught me that justice is not the same as vengeance. I wanted them to see consequence, not ruin. There is a difference between making someone pay and teaching someone what it costs to betray. I think about the nights I sat alone and worried about how a man like me might be remembered. I feared being reduced to a cautionary tale at a family reunion. But then I think of Maria and the pastor, and the neighbor who brought a ladder when my roof began to leak. Those small acts of care were testimony to a life worth preserving. Who cares for a man if not his community? The answer for me was many. The final hearing took place on a Tuesday morning that smelled like rain. The judge read from the evidence, noted the forgeries, and ordered restitution and the voiding of forged documents. He also issued sanctions and recommended criminal referral for those who had knowingly participated. My daughter and son sat in the gallery and looked like people who had been wrung out. After the judge left, my daughter approached me with her lawyer and offered both hands. "We're sorry," she said. "It was a small thing. It was not enough to erase months of absence, but it was something." I accepted her hands because my hands are not the ones that hold grudges for their own sake. I accepted them because the law had given me back a paper and a ledger and the truth. I did not demand a public apology. The judge had made a record. What I needed was a private promise to behave better, and in that cramped courthouse hallway she promised. Whether she keeps that promise is another story. People change when they must, and sometimes not until they are given no other choice. I wake early now and stand at the kitchen sink and watch the dawn. The roses are slower than I would like, but they have taken root. My days are not empty. They are smaller and truer. I learned that dignity is not a thing you inherit. It is a thing you keep by acting honorably, even when the world is cheap. If my children return fully, I will welcome them cautiously and expect work. If they do not, I will keep the roses and the memories of honest labor, and that will be enough.